Hey everyone, welcome to the Belong Collective. So excited you joined us for this digital gathering this morning. This is kind of a special digital gathering. We're in a Q&A series. You asked for it. This is your questions, and that is the entirety of today, just the response to these questions. So you can go to thebelongcollective.org if you'd like to find out more about us, if you'd like to give, if you'd like to just get connected, you can do that. But here it is. You asked for it.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, like
what's the old YouTube video? Oh, it's if you want to beatbox, just say boots and cats over and over.
Boots and cats and boots and cats
and
and boots and
boots
cats
and
and
cats.
boots and cats.
yeah.
Oh goodness. All righty. Welcome, Belong Collective, to our Q&A Sunday. Allie, Alan, and myself are here, and we are going to answer your questions. And by answer, I mean respond to, because the truth is, much of what you're giving us is, we're not going to have the final word on this. We're going to simply maybe give you some thoughts, ideas, maybe filter your question through the value lens of the Belong Collective and maybe some of our limited knowledge. And so, Alan, why don't you introduce yourself if people don't know you?
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Alan Fernandez. So I have been attending the Belong Collective, I think it's been about three years now, I want to say. So I've been attending since, I want to say the summer of 2017. No, actually, maybe in November. But anyway, been around for about 3+ years. If you see me with the Belong Collective, both pre and mid-pandemic, I almost said post, and I was like, oh, we're not there yet. You'll see me working some audio stuff. I do a lot of audio work with the Belong Collective, as well as I've even DJ'd a few of the Belong Collective events as well.
Oh yeah.
That's I'm a resident here of Harrisburg, originally from North New Jersey, so still figuring my way out through Central PA, even though I've been here for a couple of years now. But
you also led our Trouble I've Seen book club that we did amid
yes, I did do that as well.
Have also helped us with some other justice causes that we've done in the past, and have a passion for that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a lot of my time in college, and it's continued on since then.
Good deal. Allie, how about you?
Cool. Yeah. So my name is Allie, and I've been attending or a part of the Belong Collective probably since 2017-ish as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
a pastor at the Belong Collective
for a period of time. Yes, I was a campus pastor.
Once a pastor, always a pastor. Thank you.
But I now have a spot on the church board. We call it our leadership team. And that's been great. And I do a lot of stuff with like outreach and things like that. So yeah, I love being a part of this community.
Cool. All right. So here's how we're going to do this. We have not read any of the questions in advance, which I think is kind of cool. Sometimes we read them, we get prepared, we have notes. Alan and Allie have no idea what the questions are. I read a couple of them, but I tried my best when I was copying and pasting and putting them together to try not to read them. Some of them are short and sweet, and it's just hard not to read them. But here's what we're going to do. We have 11 questions currently, which, by the way, you can submit questions because we're going to be doing this for the next few weeks. We'll see how many questions we have. If you keep sending questions our way, then we'll keep answering them, and we'll just determine how long we're going to be in this series based on the questions and the relevancy of them. But what we're going to encourage you to do is go to thebelongcollective.org and click the Q&A tab, and you can submit your question for future weeks to be answered. But currently, we have 11 remaining after we subtracted the one that we answered last Sunday. With that said, I have 11, and I've numbered them each 1 through 11, and you guys are going to pick which ones we do, but you don't know what they are. Does that make sense? So you're going to get to pick 1 through 11. And based on that, I have my list right here on my iPad ready to read the question that you pick. So this is completely and entirely random. It is also completely and entirely anonymous. We do not know who submitted the question, although there were a couple that were like comments on Facebook posts or sent via social media where maybe your name was attached to it. But when we just went and added that into the website without your name attached to it. So I don't even remember who might have asked that question. So if it is your question on like a comment thread, I don't necessarily know that it's you, but you might have actually made that public. Okay. So Allie, you go first. Any
Okay.
number 1 through 11.
Okay.
No pressure, Allie.
Lots of
Yeah, no.
pressure, Allie. Lots of pressure.
I'll pick 8.
Question number 8. Do you have any suggestions on how I can improve my connection with God? Do you have any suggestions on how I can improve my connection with God? Allie, you got to go first because you picked the number.
Of course, that's how this goes. That's a great question. I think I have found that, and this is just from my own growing up, my own experience, my own life experience. I think that there's sometimes a pressure to like be spiritual, or like some people are like, well, God, I heard God say to me the other day, I was praying about this and God said to me, and it's like, sometimes it's like, well, I don't get that, like, I don't hear him. Like, what do you mean? Like, he said that to you? Like, and I think, that has like stunted like that kind of pressure, that weird thing in the background, kind of just like, well, if you're a Christian, you're supposed to connect with God. And like, so I have found, like, just an awareness of that is helpful, and like trying to let go of that, like trying to just like relax and just chill out. And like, my like experience with a connection with God is more or less like in authentic like moments, whether that's in nature or whether that's with people, whether that's with family, and yeah, I don't know, maybe like through prayer as well. I think more so when it's through prayer, it's when I'm going through a really difficult time. And it's like a desperation, where I'm just kind of like letting everything letting it all out or whatever, through prayer. But yeah, I don't know.
So what I heard you say, just to kind of make sure I understand, was like, be careful to compare your connection to other people's connections. Like, it's not that they're not connecting with God. It's not that that isn't valid and valuable for them, but it's like, just because that's the way that they connect with God, don't place an expectation on yourself to connect the
Right.
same
And
way. We're all unique, right?
yeah, and there's all sorts of ways to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of spiritual practices to kind of bring you back, but find the ones that connect for you. I like that. Alan, go for it. What do you got?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to piggyback off that a little bit. Excuse me.
You're
I'm going
fine.
to piggyback off that. I think that that's a really crucial step, is to first understand that what it means for one follower of Christ to connect with God is going to look different for another. And I would even take a step further and say that maybe even the same sort of connectedness will look different. So a really good example of that, I feel like, is prayer, where I actually had a hard time praying when I first started seriously and authentically following Jesus, because I thought it was okay, I have to lay on my bedside or get on the floor, put my hands on the bed, do a prayer, say, the Lord's Prayer, this, that, and the third. And it never clicked with me. It felt disingenuous to how I was experiencing God when I came into the faith. It felt inauthentic because I was trying to do something that didn't lead me to feel almost this peaceful conviction that I'm in that connectedness with God. So I would say, even if you're a person who says there are moments when I pray, it just doesn't look the same as others. It doesn't have to.
Yeah.
So even in that aspect, connectedness can look similar across various individuals and even various bodies as well. I mean, we as the Belong Collective, we experience connectedness with God on a communal level differently from other communities and other families. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. How another community chooses to connect with God on that communal level is going to be different from ours, but it's still connecting to that same source. So that would be that's my piggyback off of that. And my answer to that is it's basically answering with a question or responding with a question of, well, where do you feel disconnected? Where are the moments that have you asking that question? When are the moments that has you asking that question? What sort of experience have you had, or experiences do you continue having in your daily life that is bringing about that conviction of, I don't know if I feel as connected to God as I once did, or I don't, or I maybe never felt this connected before. And just digging into that. And let's say if that is the case, where you are at a point where you say, yeah, I don't feel as connected as I once was, or I still haven't figured out how to be connected to God in this way. The simple act of trying is connecting. The act of attempting to deepen that connection or to reveal it further is the act itself.
It's kind
You
of
know,
like a seek and you'll find situation, like keep
yeah.
seeking. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, or the adage to the other really famous phrasing of, or phrase of, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Mm,
Because how you get to somewhere speaks a lot to the experience you gain from a trip or some sort of
yeah.
journey. The destination is the destination, but taking the highway to a particular city versus flying there are going to be two entirely different experiences, two very different journeys that are going to have a different impact on you. So I would say, in the moments of feeling discouraged when asking this question, you're in a very ironic way doing the very thing that you're trying to figure out how to do better.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I think you guys touched on just about everything I would say. You asked for suggestions. The person did. They said, "Do you have any suggestions?" So I'll go a little more tactical because you guys both kind of went overview. I would say, tactically speaking, don't. So there's value, I think, in two kinds of prayers. There's value in repetition prayer. That's very like maybe what you were taught, the Lord's Prayer, or prayers that are popularized by saints or ancient prayers. There's value in that, or speaking blessings, even like I speak over my kids just about every day, just about every nighttime when I tuck them in. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious towards you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Their connectedness to God, I think, is in some way going to be connected to that phrasing, and I want them to sense that. Does that make sense? And even my connection to them and to God through them, like, is connected to that phrasing, and that's something that I've tried to remain repetitive about speaking over them. But at the same time, I also want to be bringing to God my needs or where I'm at emotionally in a raw way, not in a like uniformed liturgical style way. So, but I think there's value in both. I think there's value in that repetition of something that you can kind of go back to, that's like a centering prayer, or something that reminds you. And then I think there's something valuable in it being more raw, emotional, and real. So bringing both those styles of prayer when we talk about prayer, but then also saying, okay, I'm not meant to only connect to God through prayer. Like, I can connect to God through nature, through going on a hike. I can connect to God through a song that connects with me and my spirit, that awakens something in me, that maybe draws me toward kindness, that draws me toward goodness, that allows me to celebrate love, that allows me to celebrate the beauty within the world. I can connect, even like I did this morning, with a memory. Like I pulled up Facebook today, and there was an 11-year-old memory of when Magnolia, my daughter, who's now 11, was just an infant and smiling and laughing for one of the first times in her, I was sitting there kind of tickling her and playing with her, and she was laughing. And it's like, that's a connection. And that could be a moment where God even speaks to you, reminds you. So just don't be closed off at the ways that you might be able to connect with God in the normalcy of life is what I would say. I think some people feel that pressure to connect with God in all these sacred spaces, and they deny that, like, sometimes God can connect with you in sacred ways in less sacred spaces, if that makes sense. So and maybe that's actually the reality, that every space is sacred and we just fail to see it. And so yeah, I don't know, but that's good luck on connecting with God deeper. And I think we can all sense, probably in some way, a struggle to connect with God, because we typically connect with God on a Sunday morning with our community and fellowship with one another. And that has been challenged amid the pandemic. And so I'm sure for many of us, some of our practices, whatever those might be, are being challenged in this season. And so blessings to you as you attempt to connect with God, questioner. All right, Alan, 1 through 11, and you cannot choose 8.
Let's go with number 4.
Number 4, the idea that not being racist isn't enough, but needing to actively be anti-racist is something we've been hearing and reading lately. It makes a lot of sense and can be more broadly applied to intolerance as a whole. I struggle with how to still love your neighbor when it gets to a level where they are actively hurting others with their beliefs and actions. This probably falls under the love the sinner, hate the sin category, but knowing how to apply that in a productive, Jesus-centered way seems very difficult to me. There's not really a question here. It's more a statement. I'll actually answer this with yes. Yes, it is a challenge to love people who are actively hurting others. But Alan, why don't you give it a go? If you need me to reread any of it, just let me know.
Yeah, read it to me one more time.
So let's read it one more time. The idea that not being racist isn't enough, but needing to be actively anti-racist is something we've been hearing and reading lately. It makes a lot of sense and can be more broadly applied to intolerance as a whole. I struggle with how to still love your neighbor when it gets to a level where they are actively hurting others with their beliefs and actions. I think that's kind of the main point of the question. This probably falls under the love the sinner, hate the sin, that's in quotes category. But knowing how to apply that in a productive, Jesus-centered way seems very difficult to me. Can I just say, just to begin with, I kind of struggle with the love the sinner, hate the sin statement. I feel like sometimes when that is applied, we really aren't loving the sinner. I mean, in I don't know. There's just ways I've seen that applied, primarily in LGBT matters, where it really is not loving. I don't know. That's just, and again, I just want to acknowledge that's my history. That's not really that you can't have that delineation and maybe it's healthy. It's just in my history, I haven't seen it done in a healthy way. But primarily, I think the question is I struggle with how to love my neighbor when it gets to a level where they're actively hurting others with their beliefs and actions.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say when that, I'm pretty sure you had a whole sermon about that actually.
Did I?
A year or two back? Yeah, I think it was during your series about buzz phrases or buzzwords, and I think and you did. I'm pretty sure you did a sermon about that. So, maybe for that particular individual, maybe that would be a helpful or a good sermon to
I'll have to see if I can find that. I'll have to see if I can either.
So if I had to swap out that part of the statement, my immediate thought went to, I almost feel like it's a matter of how do I continue extending grace to those that are ungracious to others, or those that are not exhibiting characteristics that give hope to extending grace in that moment, or extending patience, or really honestly the fruits of the spirit in that moment. And it's not a matter of the person not wanting to. It's just, it's hard to think about how do I continue to practice loving this person and or to exhibit the fruits of the spirit when they are seemingly not doing the very thing. And that is a question that for many different people based on their context is going to look a little different, especially when we're talking about the context of, you know, fighting racism, the anti-racist phrase, because of the dynamics of race as our history has had it. That question looks very different depending on the person. Whether, let's say, if it's a if the voice of the statement was a white person speaking about their family member, and that family member also being white, or maybe even that family member being of a mixed race, or another particular race, or another particular identifying sort of characteristic. It's hard. It's hard to continuously see that individual, or see that those group of individuals exhibit that behavior, and it also really depends on the harmful behavior, the harmful actions that they're doing. You know, when it comes to matters of violence, or comes to matter of you know, particular vandalism. You know, here locally, a local synagogue here in Harrisburg was just vandalized um, with anti-Semitic statements and phrases. So that kind of changes it up a little bit, because you can, I think, in those moments where there's violence, you can practice the fruits of the spirit while still retaining safety, not just for yourselves, but also for those who are being transgressed against in that moment as well. And sort of isolating that incident. Now, let's say it's not that. It's just a matter of the day-to-day statements or day-to-day sentiments. You know, you're eating dinner and the topic of politics come at play, and in that topic you have race come into play, and there are some things said, some generalizations said, that if a person from whom that group of people is there and present for would be very hurtful. That is there's no one path approach to that, because it's so nuanced and so complex. I'd say the consistent foreground to addressing that is the aspect of recognizing, okay, this is never going to be work that's going to wrap itself up today. This is not the moment where it ends if I'm able to overcome this conflict. Sometimes there's no resolution in the moment, and sometimes there are moments where you kind of just subside. Maybe you don't have some people would categorize as a victory, even though I think it's problematic to categorize as a victory or a loss, but it's just there are moments where falling back is not is not a failure, where that is a smart move, because it's humans interacting with humans, and we have emotions that sometimes dictates over our logic, and it gets messy. And in order for it to not get any messier, and not maybe even backtrack from whatever fruits of the spirit or whatever progress has been made, sometimes it is strategic to say, okay, if we continue talking, if this continues on right now, I'm going to exhibit sentiments and behavior that's not conducive to the lifestyle I want to practice, which is the lifestyle of Christ, which is that of reconciliation, which is that of love. If I continue moving forward in this conversation, I will not be exhibiting those fruits of the spirit, or I can see myself not doing that. And so I'm going to take this step and take the initiative to withdraw, so that doesn't happen. There's no backpedaling that occurs. I think that is because it you know, the anti-racist work, you want to be successful each and every time you're doing that work, especially if you have a passion to do it, whether it be newfound because of the conversations we as a community have been having, or maybe you've been having in your other communities, whether it be at work or your family or even another faith-based community. We always want to succeed. We always want to see that progress. But it's a road where there's going to be a lot of times where you hit a brick wall. You know, but those times where you hit the brick wall, you kind of look close at the wall and you see, oh, that little crack there was from this conversation that was happening. Oh, that was happening from this conversation. And it feels over time that wall with enough cracks eventually breaks. Now, that's not to say I want you to put yourself in that situation, but that's to say that if that happens, don't be discouraged.
Alan, I think that was a good answer. I'm not even sure I'm gonna give any thoughts. Allie, do you have any thoughts? I mean,
I just want to say real quick, like, I like, Alan, what you said about it's not failure if you take a step back.
mm,
Because I think, like, but also coupled with that is like when you're trying to, like, still love somebody or still exhibit at the very least respect for another person that is doing damage. I think, and like you were saying, like, there's so many different scenarios and so many different, like, things that could play out where you're in a situation where you're seeing this happening, or maybe it's just something you know about this person that they are like this. But I think as there are opportunities to, at the very least, say something, like, even if you know, like have boundaries for yourself and have an awareness of, like you were saying, like, this conversation is not, like, they're not going to have some radical 180 today, you know, but acknowledgement and, like, just the simple fact of saying something is like, you've said something and they can't unhear what you said. So whether they like it or not, they're going to take that information with them. They're going to take what you said with them. And they may not agree with you in that moment or whatever. But sometimes we need to sit with information, so, and process. So, and then I think the other side to that is I think, even though you're just acknowledging or just saying, you know, a sound bite of something to that person, and then kind of walking away and saying, like, look, I like, and I did the question or the statement say that it was their neighbor, or was
just
that like,
as I think they're just asking about the obligation to love your neighbor as yourself. I think
yeah,
that's what the reference.
it's just like, look, you know, like, I don't want to get into, like, a disrespect, like, I don't want to disrespect one another, but, like, I do want to say this, like, I want to keep some sort of relationship with you, even though it's extremely difficult, and sometimes those difficulties have me placing boundaries on what our relationship looks like because of these things. But when you walk away from that, like, also try and hold, like, an openness for when that person comes back to you and says, you know, I was thinking about what you said. And then you can have, like, a more in-depth conversation. And those are the conversations we just kind of hope, like, result, you know, out of those initial acknowledgments, those initial, like, interruptions where you kind of interrupt somebody's thought process on something because you know it's damaging, you know, and you're just like, oh, like, I'm gonna just say this one thing, and you know, if you want to have, like, a longer conversation, an open conversation about it later, like, please let me know, and I'm here to do that.
Yeah, and even in those moments, again, recognizing that sometimes it'll take a while before it gets to that point. You can continue, like, as you were talking, Ali, the word I thought about was de-escalation. I love the word, and I think it's a practice across many different fields that is very valuable. But in thinking of, you know, in this case, what's happening is there's a conflict, and that conflict, excuse me, and in that conflict, you have somebody who's saying something that is very much an aggression and or very offensive or whatever the case may be towards individual or group of people. Right, there is a conflict. So the next step is, okay, how do we get to a point where this is no longer an issue, or how do we get to a point where this immediate uncomfortability, this immediate sort of like, oh, like, this is the sort of the feeling you have deep down in the back of your head. How do we get rid of that? So resolving conflict, so thinking of de-escalation, and I think you have to look at how can you do that in a couple different ways. So let's say, you know, if you're dealing with this particular individual and you're trying to, you know, love your neighbor and talk to them, this might be a bit radical, but I think another way to love your neighbor is to, again, back away and not prevent further escalation, and show support and be there for whomever is being transgressed against, whether it's there at the dinner table or if it's, something in general. I mean, again, it's very situational, but, let's say if something is being said and there's somebody at the table who is being transgressed against in that statement, a generalization that is hitting this one person very particularly. And okay, if I say something at the dinner table right now, things about to pop off. This is not going to be the move. But instead, maybe thinking, okay, hey, so and so, let me talk to you for a sec. Maybe just pull them aside and say, I just want you to know I heard that. I am not okay with that. I'm sorry that was said. And I'll be real with you. I don't know how to deal with that right now. And I'm not sure how to say it or what to say, but I want you to know immediately that I apologize and that should not have happened. And again, no way is perfect, but thinking of just ways to de-escalate and or support those that are being transgressed against is, I think, in a way, showing love to that neighbor, because there is this moment of you saying, I have hope that I can navigate the space, and I have hope that that person can enter that space as well and listen to what is said and have a practice of empathy and really digest what's happening and what's being said and what harm has been done.
Okay, so I'm gonna play the other side.
Okay. Ooh, I was wondering when this is gonna happen.
Well, here's what I'm gonna say, because I think I'm all about de-escalation, but I also think there's a time to escalate. And I only say that to say, at what point are we neglecting love of neighbor for the person being oppressed by emphasizing a love of the person who has power over and is doing the harming of the oppressed person? So at what point, 1 Corinthians 13 says, love always protects, always. And we always apply this to like military and, however you like, we apply this to violence as if Paul's advocating violence, which is shocking to me, because he would have believed fully and completely nonviolence. But love always protecting, as in stepping in and actually being willing to be marginalized, to place yourself next to those who are being marginalized and ultimately receive the outcome of the realities of the marginalization. So I can say this in my own personal experience that in 2019 I did that, in that, and I'm not trying, I just want to be careful to, like, this isn't me virtue signaling. I'm just more saying, like, I had spent multiple years becoming very aware of the plight of LGBT people in church communities. And I had stood on the sidelines for a long time, and it became very clear that, like, the proper loving thing here to do is to stand with these people who are being marginalized, even if it means I take the full weight of that marginalization, which I did. I think there's a time when you realize these individuals have been given every opportunity to take a step. And I've been patient. I've tried to inform. I've done the pulling away. I've done the escalating in these minor escalations, or the nudging, the prodding, whatever you want to call it. I do think there's a time for that propheticness. Here's what I want to say, though. That propheticness, if it comes with you being, if that propheticness comes without you typically experiencing the marginalization of that community along with them, does that make sense? Or experiencing some marginalization with yourself. Like, if you don't experience marginalization, but you experience a sense of like self-righteousness and pride and like elevation, you're probably not doing it right. It's usually going to humble you. It's usually going to be something that puts you in a difficult position. It's usually going to be something that you really don't want to do for a lot of reasons, I guess. Does that make sense? So when I think of like the dinner table analogy, I'm like, oh, the last thing I want to do is call out this person right now. But sometimes the last thing you want to do is the thing you should do. So I think we got to be careful what our motives are, is what I would say. And the big tension, I think, with this question, and ultimately with our country right now as we process this stuff, is the balance between humility, the reality that like we need to be humble, with like things that are just obvious things that are right and wrong. Like, there were things that I was taught growing up that were just obvious. That's right. That's wrong. And now Who knows? Like in our world, we'll find excuses for whoever's on our side that does the right or wrong thing, and to make the wrong thing right, to make the right thing wrong. So like sometimes you're like, okay, we can all agree locking kids in cages is a bad thing. Well, I don't know, they shouldn't have crossed the border illegally. And you're just like, hold on, we're talking about kids in cages. When did this become a thing that we cannot agree on? Like there are certain things, I guess I'm trying to say, where like nuance is not necessary. Now the person might be uninformed, and I think you have an obligation to humbly journey with them and inform them. But if they're hard-hearted, I don't think the process there in their hard-heartedness is to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just not going to talk about this and hope things change, because that's not going to happen. I don't know. And this is, I just want to be very clear. I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. So for me, I look at this and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm very much a challenger. That's what the 8 is. It's a challenger. It's someone who sees unjust systems and is like, what are we doing? So I have tension here, and I just want to be very clear. I've misstepped in this recently. Even in processing with people who I deeply love, who see things very different than I, around pandemic issues, and are, in my opinion, are spreading very misinformation that ultimately could lead to people being harmed, and has been shown to lead to people being harmed. The idea that this is a hoax. I feel an obligation to say, let's not do that. Like, does that make sense? Like, that's going to legitimately harm people when we do that. But I also have gained a sense of like, okay, at a certain point, this person has their platform, can say what they want, can do what they want, and I'm going to let that go. The tough part is, and this is the real big piece here, social peer pressure is a real thing. And I'm going to say this, it's a necessary thing. I'm not sure what I think about it from a biblical perspective, but there's a reason that we all know saying the N-word is wrong, because social pressure has placed that as a reality. Does that make sense? There's a reason these social pressures and cues that we have and have agreed upon as a society are there. And that usually comes from a place of enough people saying, no, you can't do that. So I do think when I say no and have the difficult conversation, and even if that relationship for a period of time, or for a short period of time or a long period of time, is potentially fractured slightly because of it, I've probably, or at least it can be argued, that I potentially am doing the loving thing by protecting the person who may down the line be influenced by that person's actions or thoughts. Again, this is not easy. I'm not saying that's the way you should always respond the way I just said. I'm just saying this is the two sides of the coin here that I don't think we should always be landing on the same side of the coin. That's the problem. I have a tendency to fall on one side of the coin faster than the other, and I have to check myself. So know your personality.
Yeah.
Know the side you.
Yeah, and I will agree with that. So you brought in Enneagrams, so I'm gonna bring mine into this too. So I'm a type 2. So my type 2 is much of the giver and the helper.
Yeah.
So I approach things from a very collaborative perspective, even if the person who I'm trying to collaborate with doesn't want anything to do with the project. Anything.
They don't want to collab on the track, but you're putting them on anyway.
They don't want to drop a verse, but you're like, you're gonna drop this verse. No. But so that's my personality.
Yeah.
Is very much that. And also I'll say this, is that some of it I think is a little bit of sort of where you're at contextually. So I don't tend to default to that. Okay, I'm I forgot what movie or song this is from, but whoever hears this will get this. The habitual line stepper. I don't remember where that's from, but I just think of that line. I'm not a line stepper, and a lot comes from also my experience as a person of color, especially in the majority white spaces, which a lot of that was in my time in college, where I knew if I became the habitual line stepper, if I stepped the line real quick, not only would I probably not have success in what I'm ultimately trying to do, but I might even enforce some negative stereotypes that my surrounding might have of me, as, oh, he's the angry kid of color, or oh, he's the he's the guy who's all about racial justice, but he got a scholarship because of that. So, can he really be mad? Like that, those were some of the things that I had to think about and has been said to me, maybe not that up front, but definitely, in very subversive ways. And so I think who we are contextually, not just based on our personality and our character type, but also where are we at? What does that environment look like? And so I think that's why I kind of was leaning towards the de-escalation, and maybe we could change the word to just this sense of strategically falling back to think, okay, something has to happen. How do I go do that?
Well, and that's actually, I think you're onto something there. I'm not saying de-escalation is a bad thing. I'm saying, so like, if you think of Dr. King didn't always engage when he was given an opportunity to engage. Sometimes he would hang back and be like, you know what? We need to do more planning before we engage that, because that's going to require more process, more of a just, we're going to need to get some resources together before we go back into that conversation. So I actually think there's value in not letting someone else's ignorance dictate how you're going to engage. I also think fruits of the spirit, 110%, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. We're talking currently right now about self-control. Like, how do I ensure that however I'm responding, I'm in control of myself? Because typically that's the first thing that goes. You get emotional, you respond out of that place, and ultimately you regret the way you responded. In the moment, you feel justified about the way you respond. We've all been there. And then the next day, the next week, the next month, after you've had some time to reflect on it, you realize that undercut what I was trying to do. And you usually have to eat a certain amount of crow at that point and have a certain amount of humility to come back to the conversation, circle back in a more healthy way. So I think part of what you're saying about disengaging is not, or even de-escalating. The big concern I have is that people of privilege will just disengage, de-escalate, and walk away. If disengaging, de-escalating is then walking away with and trying to create a plan for how to approach that in the future, that is ultimately going to protect people who are marginalized, going to elevate a necessary conversation, then I'm fine with it. If it's just you defaulting to your privilege, though, and I'm not even saying this questioner is a person of privilege, I don't know their experience, but I guess I'm saying as a person of privilege, I think of it that way. I have to be cautious to default to my privilege, because I can ignore those things around the kitchen table. I have for years. I have in awkward joking conversations where I'm like, wow, that joke went way over the line. But if I'm the one amongst these 5 people to be the one to say that joke went over the line, oh, that's an awkward place to be. No one likes that feeling. I don't want to be the one to bring that feeling. And ultimately, I have the privilege to hang back and not say anything. So I think what we're trying to say here, and I'll just wrap it here, there's no direct prescription for how to respond. But we should be trying to look like Jesus in whatever way we respond. And Jesus did not respond to every question that was asked of him. Jesus did not respond in every way that he was expected to respond. He definitely threw out some random parables at times, some random thoughts, but he did always champion the marginalized. So however we're going to do this, I think we need to consider them in this too. Yeah, go ahead, Alan. Did you have?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm just going to add, because the imagery I thought as you were saying that was, there were times when Jesus was flipping tables.
Yep.
And there were times when Jesus was retreating into nature to pray and replenish and convene with his Father to then continue his ministry.
And also there was time when Jesus was saying, love your neighbors or love your enemy, love your neighbor as yourself, but love your enemy. So like, even if you got to the point where you're like, this person is my enemy and I cannot stand them, that does not divorce you from the call to love that person. So we said a lot about that question. Can I just say that's a really good question? And I think it's really relevant.
It wasn't even a question. It was just a statement.
Yeah,
it was good.
Exactly. It was a great statement for our Q&A. Allie, 1 through 11, and you cannot choose, I think, is it 8 or 4? Yeah, 8 or 4.
Correct.
11.
11. I didn't know if you guys were going to do this. What does the
Oh,
Bible
no,
say
never
about
seen
smoking weed?
Hey.
Nothing. Moving on.
Wait, is that for real number 11?
That's for real number 11. What does the
Oh.
Bible say about smoking weed?
I mean, isn't there something about like, I mean, you could say like the whole like your body is your temple, like kind of deal, right?
Sure. Is that what you want to say?
I don't know.
No, I mean, that's a,
Like, I don't know. Y'all want to talk about this?
I think we have to. It was a question
I'm
asked.
totally game for this conversation.
Alan is like, I'm ready. I've been waiting for this one. Alan
just a
sent
quick-
this one in.
I was about to say,
Alan
It's mine.
sent
It's
this
mine.
one in.
No.
like, we drink alcohol, you know, like we eat.
Not everyone. Some people don't.
Some people don't, yes. But what I'm saying is we can do harmful things to our body in all sorts of ways. And so my first thought was, well, in moderation. Like,
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
but that's kind of like my short answer.
Can I share a quick funny story? There was I was a youth pastor, and we had like, I want to say at this point, like 70 plus kids, and we did a Q&A series with them, and I got this exact question. And so like I started talking, and then like, and it was anonymous who asked the question, but then like hands started going up of one kid, and it was clear that like this is the kid that asked the question who was a pothead, which is great, you know, like he's a high school pothead, and he's like, but doesn't Genesis say that God gave us every plant to be enjoyed? And I'm like, oh, you're quoting Genesis now. I didn't know you had your face in a Bible. Cool. And it was like this kid all of a sudden became a Bible scholar because he wanted God to support his weed addiction. I don't know.
What's funny about that is I had a friend in college who was trying to prove the point that the Bible supported smoking weed, and I was like, "How, man?" He goes, "Come on, man. You know the story about Moses with that burning bush. You think that burning bush was just burning? No, there was some stuff happening." And I was like, "Oh boy."
So you go first. Go ahead.
Well, what I'm overall saying is that like we can eat food, like we can overeat, we can overwork, we can overexercise.
Yeah.
We, you know, like
No, we can't overexercise. Let's not go there. Moving on. No, I'm just kidding. No, we definitely can. We definitely can. No. I think when we talk about the temple, the body being a temple, the imagery given there in that passage is the idea that the temple is a sacred place. So how we treat our body should be in a way that is sacred. I think the concern is you can quote that passage to support just about any prohibition of anything, including caffeine, friends. So be cautious if you're going to hinge your theology or ethic about any substance on that particular passage, because it can definitely be wrongly applied, I guess. Yeah, but Alan, I got some stuff to say about this, but I'm gonna let you go first, and then I'll follow because I want to.
Yeah. So my quick response to this is, if it is, well, first off, consuming or participating in smoking marijuana, as far as we know it, pretty sure was not touched on at all in scripture. Like there was no, like I was drinking alcohol. There are touches to that in scripture. There's clear cases you can read a story and see, oh yes, they were drinking alcohol in this wedding or in this festivity. There are no pieces of scripture that say, yeah, so John rolled on the paper and then ignited it. Like there's nothing like that. So as far as scripturally, there's really nothing touching this as far as I know. Now, as far as, you know, looking at it from, okay, well then how do we take this and filter this question? I'm going to go back to the fruits of the spirit and say, if this particular activity, this particular item is not allowing you to exhibit the fruits of the spirit and is not allowing you to practice to live out a Christ-like lifestyle as you have come to experience it, and as you experience it with your community and family and loved ones, then I would say it's problematic. And I would say,
You would say that about probably every substance, correct?
yeah, well, because so I say this also because I have loved ones who struggle with alcoholism or have
Mhm.
them run in their family,
Yeah.
and I personally enjoy partaking in alcohol in various contexts, and because I can still feel like I can exhibit fruits of the spirit when consuming alcohol, which has very much happened because some of the most theological, spiritual, and ethical conversations I've ever had in my life have occurred at a bar or over a drink of alcohol.
Mhm.
And so it can serve as this meeting place of souls and minds to have critical dialogue and conversation with each other. It's not the sole key to that happening. It can happen in any context, but that is a common one. So for me, I don't feel like it draws me away from practicing a Christ-like life that I have for myself. However, for others, it can lead to that. It can lead,
Mhm.
partaking in that can lead them to think things that don't adhere to what they want for themselves or what they believe Christ is calling them to.
Or
And
self-control, which is one of the fruits of the spirit. Yeah.
exactly that. And that can happen for anything. It can happen with alcohol, with weed too. There are particular friends of mine that I know who can't go a day without smoking it and don't have self-control to either not practice that or not ignore a responsibility or a task or something like that because they want to just do that.
Mhm.
But the same thing can be said for Ali. You kind of touched on it with food. I mean, you can not there's chances of you breaking self-control with food, with exercise, with running, and sometimes these sort of situations also tie into some medical and or mental conditions as well. Um, and so there's complexity with that too. But I would say ultimately, you know, inherently, I don't see any opposition. I think you have to look at the question of, is this inhibiting my ability to continue seeking Christ, or are there opportunities when this is introduced, I don't have self control?
Yep.
Then I need to ask that for myself, and then share that with my community, so that way not only am I setting myself up for first and foremost safety, because sometimes when these elements are at play and there's no self-control, sometimes we put ourselves in, or not put ourselves, we have situations where we might not be safe. But
Sure.
that'd be my answer.
So let me begin by letting everyone know, if you don't know, I'm 36 years old. I've never had an alcoholic beverage. That's been very intentional on my part, not theologically, not because that's the way I read the Bible, but because I have a long history of alcoholism in my family, and I feel very cautious about participating in a substance that can do so much harm. And as a youth pastor for many years, I saw much of the harm that um, alcoholism, and even as a lead pastor, I see the harm that alcoholism causes. So I just want to say my initial gut reaction on substances is caution, because of my family's experience. And that's been a long standing, even today at 36, feeling generally responsible, I still don't participate. Now that doesn't mean I will always be there. There may come a day where I feel the freedom to drink, and I'm open to that. But I guess I say that to say what I'm going to say next, if it sounds a little bit more progressive minded or whatever, like, that's not coming from a place of participating myself. I have yet to participate with weed, so I don't know necessarily what I mean. I know the generalizations or the stereotypes of what it does, but I don't necessarily have personal experience with that. So I'll say we as a society have an interesting standard for what we allow and don't allow, because I think by all social markers, alcohol is far more dangerous than weed. And that just seems pretty clear. Now, that's not the scriptural standard, and you did ask about what the Bible says, but I do want to say, as a society, we got to question that. I think we also have to question stigmas on people, because we are people who see the image of God in all people, and we don't want people to be lessened because of a practice they participate in. And what's interesting to me is I've seen churchgoers, no friends. Okay, I'll just share a story. I went to a Super Bowl party where multiple churchgoers were there getting drunk, and the Bible's very clear about drunkenness, and I mean drunk, not like a little bit tipsy. I mean drunk. These same people would be like having a difficult problem with people who smoke weed regularly. Like that would be a super taboo. How could you? Like that'd be grounds for not being able to be a church member. Yet the Bible is not clear on that. So we just need to be careful that we don't get to a plank in our own eye, speck in someone else's in this situation, is what I would be very, very cautious for anyone who has deep beliefs about weed. Just be very cautious. I am confident I have more than 300 milligrams of caffeine a day, maybe even in one drink. So like I am dependent on that substance for my mood, for my, you might even say self-control. And I should be humble enough to acknowledge that, recognize that, and determine whether or not that's something that is affecting me. So that should be a concern. This is also a justice issue because you have so many people dealing with mandatory minimum sentences, 15 years in prison for some cases of like a baggie of weed, which just seems absolutely ridiculous. Like, so you have just a whole justice issue around this particular substance. That doesn't mean we should just legalize it, but it does mean that like we should be cognizant and aware that there are people whose lives have been completely altered and ruined, not because of this substance, but because of the way in which our justice system has treated them with this substance, and it's disproportionately affected Black people, yet all markers say white and Black people smoke weed about the same rates. So these are big problems, I think. Again, not the nature of the question, but I do want to give all of this context before I give an answer. So when it comes to smoking weed, the first thing I would say is, and when I talk to my friend and TBC goer, Dr. Nathan McConkey, he's going to tell you putting any smoke in your lungs is bad for your lungs. That's actually the deeper thing I'm concerned about. If you're smoking weed, you're putting smoke in your lungs. It is bad for your body. When we talk about treating the body like a temple, I'm less worried about the actual substance of weed and what that's going to do to you, and more about the smoke in the lungs and what that's going to do to your body long term, because that actually can have some really bad effects. Smoking is really negative on your body. So there's edibles, there's other options. So let's just stick with the, marijuana in general. When I look at scripture, I see a God that allows, or a God revealed fully in Jesus. And when Jesus leaves, he says, I'm sending one greater than you, the Spirit. And on matters that we don't have absolute clarity on, like this particular one, I think we're free to consider like, this is where the Spirit steps in and guides. And I think we should have the utmost wisdom. And like you even said, Alan, I think if we're going to participate in any substance, we should ensure that we're placing ourselves in a safe environment, that anybody else around us, that ultimately, hopefully we're in a very trusting environment. If there's potential for self-control or what could happen, like I think there's freedom here. I also think the other factor is that you have to determine what your moral standard is for potentially breaking the law, because in some cases, if you're going to smoke weed, I think in Pennsylvania it's not legal unless it's medicinal. Correct? Am I correct on that? Okay. So like if you're in Colorado though, it's not that your theology changes, it's that your circumstance changes. So maybe because there it is recreationally available, if I'm correct, then maybe you're on vacation in Colorado and you choose to participate. And by the way, that's very controlled substance. Like you're, from what I understand, you would be getting it in a way that is controlled and safe to a certain degree, I guess. So, but let me say this, because I'm confident at the Belong Collective, we have people passionate on both sides of this subject. So I just want to be really clear. Some of you are very passionate on legalize weed, decriminalize it, and you have all of these reasons why it'll be the best thing for our society if we do this. And maybe you're right. And then there's other of you who are like, if we legalize weed, it is a slippery slope to everyone with a heroin needle in their arm. Like, we have both sides represented, and ultimately we don't know. Human behavior is not something you can theorize out 10 years and just say, well, if we do this, this will happen. Because the truth is we don't know. I tend to lean more toward personal freedom when it comes to theology in matters that are not clear scripturally, because I think the church loves to be the judge, jury, and executioner of your personal freedoms. And I have a deep problem with that. I have a deep problem with us withholding love, withholding acceptance, withholding belonging because someone does something, even if it is scripturally prohibited. Like, I have a problem with that. And we tend to do that in this particular conversation. So I don't think the Bible says anything, but I do think we have to seek the Spirit in it. Does that make sense? Any follow-up? No? Good?
I think we
Okay.
should get another question in.
You don't want to end on the weed one? Alan, 1 through 11, no 4, no 8, no 11.
Okay. Real quick, I just want to clarify the habitual line stepper statement. It's Charlie Murphy, Dave Chappelle show. That's where I got it. I just had to say because it was bugging me the entire time. Okay.
Nice.
So
Good
you know,
reference.
since this might be our last question, it looks like Allie
I hope it's
asked,
not a hard one.
Well, she capped off with 11. I'm gonna cap off with number 1.
Ooh,
Go
okay.
ahead and get that out there.
If Jesus were to come to our community today, do a teaching as we gather around him, socially distancing, of course, what would his top 3 encouragement challenges be to those gathered? Then, based on your comment, what thing can/must we do to live that out? All right. So what would Jesus's top 3 encouragements/challenges be to those who are gathered? And what would we do to live that out? Do we just each want to come up with one, since there's 3 of us? One thing Jesus would challenge us with if he were to come back today to the church. Oh man, I got too many to pick one.
I got a couple going through. And I guess since I read the question, I got to come up with the first one here, huh?
Sure.
unless you feel called to kick it off, you can
That's a hard question. I mean, for me, it's a hard question.
So I'll begin this question. I don't have an answer yet, but I'll begin by just saying, one of the things I hear both sides of any conversation doing is feeling like they have Jesus on their side. And like, if Jesus were to come back, he would say it this way. He would be on my side. Like, I do think there's a value in being humble and being careful to be like, if Jesus came back, he would emphasize what I'm frustrated about. Like, I do think in some cases, if you're championing the marginalized, you're probably accurate, but I don't think that's the way to communicate to people who maybe are following Jesus, but aren't concerned about that, to get them to come follow Jesus, because you're saying if Jesus were back today, he would be concerned with what I'm concerned about. I think the bigger thing is to say, look at what Jesus was concerned about back in his day and how that connects to today. So I think Jesus, here's my answer. I'll give my answer. I think Jesus would consider whoever the Samaritans are of our day, whoever the widows and orphans are of our day, whoever the prostitutes are of our day, whoever the tax collectors are of our day, the people that are hated and marginalized and pushed to the side by society. And he would say, those are the ones that we should be in relationship with, in community with, bringing dignity to, not being ashamed of. That's what I would, but I'm not going to like contextualize and say that's who that would be, and that's who that would be, and that's who that would be. I certainly have my opinions on that. I just think we have to be cautious to co-opt Jesus for whatever side we're on, because I see that on both sides. Yeah. Okay.
So I'll go ahead with number 2, because I'm going to piggyback off that, because as we were thinking of this, my immediate first thought was with Jesus had to challenge us on one of these things. And I would say it could be a challenge and an encouragement, depending on who hears it.
That's what they said. They said challenge or encouragement. So they did use
Yeah.
both languages in the question.
The phrase challenging the binary came to mind, and I'll say it in this way. I think one of the things he would challenge us to do, which can lead to encouragement of how we live, is recognize your allegiances and challenge why you have them. And that could be taken in many different ways. The way I kind of stated that is thinking in regards to nationality. I think national allegiances. I'll start by saying this because I know there are people in our community on both sides of what I'm about to say next. So I'll preface it in this way. Inherently, national allegiance, or maybe I would say, you know, national love or love for their country or love for where they were born and grew up in, is not inherently a bad thing. Like, you know, I do not see inherent evil or anything like that with someone saying, you know, I love the country I was born in, which in many of our cases could be I love America, which, and again, I know there are members of our community who America is not a good country, so that's problematic. But replace the name of the country with any country, I could logically and empathetically understand why one would come to that feeling. So I want to preface it with that. But I do think when it comes to living out Christ's ministry of reconciliation and living out what it means to love like Christ, we have to acknowledge the presence of allegiances and how it has inhibited that goal and inhibited that lifestyle in various ways. From a national perspective, and, you know, I think a good friend of mine who is Canadian and grew up in the Brethren in Christ tradition, who challenged me a lot on this and really helped shape my views after graduating, in that the idea that America is God's country has done harm for various communities and various people. And our love for country sometimes, or a lot of times, supersedes our love of our fellow man. And I think Jesus would call a lot of challenge into that. Not for the sake of him saying, do disown your country, do not love your country, but rather do not allow your national allegiance to supersede what it is that I love and care about, which is fellow man. And as
the way of saying that, quite honestly, is what Jesus consistently emphasized in his ministry was the kingdom of God. It is like this in the kingdom of God. It is like this in the kingdom of God. He very well, if he came back, like you're saying, would break down our allegiances to remind us about the kingdom of God, not the kingdom of America, not the kingdom of Canada, not the kingdom of whatever country we might be allegiant to, or whatever even state we might be allegiant to, right? Like, it would be this breaking down and seeing that there's a kingdom beyond this one that we're called to be allegiant to first and foremost. That's really good. Yeah. Very good. Allie, you've had time.
Yeah,
You better come up with the best.
So I'll end with this. So with the Enneagram, I am a 9.
We're just all giving our Enneagram numbers tonight.
Yeah, I was gonna
say. If you don't know what the Enneagram is, just Google Enneagram. Road Back to You is a great book. Go ahead, Allie.
So the 9 is the peacemaker. And I just think, like, this answer obviously is like, like going to say something about peace. But I don't know. I think you both kind of touched on these ideas with Justin. You spoke briefly of being humble. Alan, you talked about being binary. Like, you started with the concept of binary issues, things like that. And at the Belong Collective, we talk a lot about like being in the mess, like being like right in the middle of things. And I think that our pride gets in the way, and we get real stuck on what we believe in. And I think what we would be challenged with or encouraged to do is a lot of self-examination when it comes to how we're interacting and engaging with others in such dividing times. How are we stepping into those spaces? Are we humble enough to recognize and acknowledge, look, this is messy. Like, our world is broken. Like, we need these reminders so that we can remain humble when interacting with one another. Because I think, I don't know, I tend to think, like, if we do that, then like maybe there's like a more peaceful way forward. Not to say, I know Justin as a
No,
8,
that's good. That's good. No, that's everything you're saying is good. I'm not.
like, there are times, and like even as a peacemaker, even as a 9, you know, I am like, my desire for peace sometimes is like wrapped up in like, well, to get peace, like we're gonna have to like kind of like put our shoulder into it a little bit and like ruffle some feathers to get there. And like, I'm all about that, like when the time is right for that. But I also just think like we get so stuck in, you know, on the sides, you know, and it's just like, we're human, we're broken, our world is broken. Like, I think those reminders are important for us to stop and kind of just self-examine, check our pride as we step into those spaces with each other.
Jesus might come back and say, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and by peacemakers I mean you number 9s. And you'd be like, "Whoop, whoop," and then he'd tell you how, you know, I don't know how we're messing up, but yeah, I'm pretty sure Jesus would say a number of things about our current context, and those are 3 ideas, but I'm sure there's hundreds more of what could be said by Jesus with everything going on in our world right now. Yeah, I think we should be reading the words of Jesus these days and considering how these stories apply to our current scenarios, because I still think scripture is speaking to us even now. I don't think we need Jesus to magically return and like do a Sermon on the Mount at the Belong Collective. I think if we just go read the Sermon on the Mount, we're probably going to be like, holy crap, a lot of this really applies to what's going on right now. Like, so let's do that. Thank you guys. Allie, Alan, thank you for sharing your thoughts, for being here. And next time we do a Q&A, maybe we'll have you back, maybe some other people, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It was a great pleasure to be here.
Good work. You guys even were able to give some really good insight to a curveball weed question, which is the first in Belong Collective history. So
Guaranteed, if anybody talks about the Belong Collective this way, they're gonna be like, yeah, our pastors did a Q&A with 2 of our members and they talked about weed.
it happens. This is why you get to ask the questions. So go to thebelongcollective.org, click on the Q&A tab, and ask your questions. Whatever is relevant to you, we will do our best to provide some answers. Thank you for being with us. This coming Sunday is Unlikely Wonders Sunday. So a week from today is Unlikely Wonders Sunday at Indian Echo Caverns. You need to be there if you're able to be in crowds, if that's something you're doing. Obviously, we're wearing masks. We're practicing social distancing. I'm not sure if we're going to be streaming it because I think there might be some copyright issues, but if we are streaming it, just find our Facebook. If you're not already there, the Belong Collective on Facebook will be streaming it to that platform like we do all of our physical social distancing gatherings. So come on out for Unlikely Wonders Sunday. It should be a good time. Peace.